Chapter 2: Women and Women's Issues. At the end of the chapter, you would be familiar with the following issues. 1. What do you understand by women? 2. What are the different dichotomies between women and men? 3. What are the different approaches to the study of women? 4. The situation and status of women in the third world. 5. A global view of the situation of women in a glance. In the class, students are usually asked the very simple question, what comes to your mind when you hear the word women? At first, the boys are given the opportunity to present their views among other issues. Invariably, the common answer is mother, while for the majority of girl students, the core word is responsible. These two words clearly represent the differences in the mindset of both boys and girls. Even today, the views of boys have not changed regarding looking at women as mothers, only responsible for the welfare of the family, while the views of girls emphasize the role of women as responsible towards their work. Each view looks at only one aspect of women, for example, as mother, home aspect, and as worker, work aspect. Although both are correct in their perspective, the status of men and women have been constructed around a whole series of dichotomies. These are as follows: 1. The other. 2. Work, home. 3. Public, private. 3. 4. Mind, body. 5. Rational, emotional. 6. Culture, nature. 7. Autonomy and dependence. The first one of each pair tends to be associated with men and positively valued, while the second is associated with women and negatively viewed. Parsons and Bales considered that men were more task-oriented, instrumental rationality, where women were more predisposed towards caring for others, affectionate rationality. Instrumental rationality continues to be associated with masculinity, and expressive and emotional features are constantly linked with femininity. In most societies, women are expected to be soft, affective, intuitive, obedient, and dependent. Men must be intellectual, competitive, ambitious, curious, and rational decision makers and planners. Millet 1970, Bonaparte 1979. While women are expected to display more feelings, to be emotional and be nurturing and caring, men are expected to be abstract, aggressive, and strong. Most societies assign women to roles of home managers, mothers, and by extension, community organizers. In contrast, males are depicted as providers, drawing economic resources from the world of work. Women are assigned supportive endeavors as caretakers and producers of goods and services in the non-monetarized household economy. Piety and Ryan, 1983. Home. Private sphere is taken for granted as the domain of women, whereas the work public world is the domain of men. The significance of these dichotomies were also epitomizes the process of an understanding of power relations between men and women. However, emphasis is given to three dichotomies which are particularly important in defining the social relation of women in comparison to men. First, the relation between work and home. Second, the relation between public and private. And third, the relations between autonomy and dependence. Looking at the social definition of women, we find that the ways in which social institutions, practices, and discourses define women in contemporary societies, the three institutions like family, state, and in economy define women in relation to men. In familial terms, relation in the family, women are defined as carriers and nurturers. Their identity and status are derived from their relation to the explicit categories as mothers, daughters, and wives. For example, we often hear that she is the mother of Abdul, usually the name of her son. She is Mrs. Ahmed, after the name of Mr. Ahmed, or she is Salma, the daughter of Mr. Chaudhary. In all categories, her name is usually associated with that of a man's name. At the state or community level, she is also presented as someone's mother, daughter, or wife in whatever position she holds in the community or state level. Women are not only defined in relation to men, they are also seen as dependent on men and subordinate to them. Men, on the other hand, are not defined in relation to women in purely familiar terms, but in relation to the larger public world in which they operate as workers, colleagues, or citizens. Only in exceptional cases is a man defined or categorized in relation to women. That is when he is the son or husband of the leader of the nation or a celebrity like a noted singer or film personality. According to Blake and Coward, women are precisely defined, never general representatives of humanity or all people, but as specifically feminine and frequently sexual categories. Being a man is an entitlement not to masculine attributes but to non-gender subjectivity. Black and Coward, 1981, p. 83. Men's specific gender is thus ignored. They represent the universal and the human to which women are other. This perception of women as the other has been taken for granted in most social and political thought and analysis as well as in everyday life. In line with the question of differences between women and men, there is also the question of differences between women, differences which at times seem so vast that they threaten to undercut the very notion of women. There is no automatic sisterhood of women, as noted sociologist Robert Morgan claimed. Women are divided by class, by race, by geography, and history. Thus, it makes more sense if we work towards developing a more specific theory for distinctly separate groups of women with separate characteristics and experiences. In this perspective, a key issue that needs to be considered is the identification of differences between women in Western and Third World so as to better understand that the empowerment of oppressed groups, especially through consciousness raising of making women aware of the exploitation and the potential power they have to change their situation, is rooted in the very idea that the concept of women's liberation underlies most Western thinkers about the modern role and status of women. This leads us to focus on the different approaches by which we can study women. These are, for example, number one, the evolutionary approach. An evolutionary view of the development of society proposes that throughout much of history, defense, subsistence, and reproduction were necessary for survival. For the early days of civilization, women naturally devoted most of their time to reproduction, participating in subsistence when men were engaged in warfare or in favorable conditions, to such an extent in hunting, because hunting was regarded as a work requiring great physical strength and power, where women were considered to be physically weak and henceforth unsuitable to perform such a job. It was generally been held that women were precluded from participating in prestigious human activities, and this also contributed to male dominance. As a result, they were confined to the domestic domain of performing household activities, mainly focusing on the reproductive role of looking after the family and collection of food, fodder, and fuel. The notion that women had to work long areas and miles to collect materials for food and water were not recognized as laborious work. They fell under the purview of domestic work. Men's domination of women everywhere was based on male control and strategic resources. 2. The structural approach. The structure of society is patriarchal, implying male domination and female subordination. Women were always under the domination of men and worked as they pleased. They were treated as slaves, just fit to do the work men demanded. Consequently, they were always discriminated, oppressed, violated, and stayed in a disadvantaged state in both home and outside. 3. The productive approach. Women were always denied the means of production and deprived of doing productive work. Whatever work they did in the domestic sphere were never recognized nor given any value. As such, they lacked access to resources and stayed oppressed and controlled by men. 4. The traditional cultural and religious approach, traditional norms, cultural values, and religious practices always worked against women. They were the causes of women's subordinate position in the family and society, leading to their subordination, oppression, and poverty. Status of women in the Third World. In talking about the status of women, it is important to distinguish between two aspects. 1. Condition, and 2. Situation. Young 1988 has defined condition as the maternal state in which women live, low wages, poor nutrition, lack of access to health care, education, and training. Position, on the other hand, is the social and economic status as compared to men. Status refers to a composite picture of situation, expectations, rights, and aspirations. Safilios Rothschild 1082 defines status of women in terms of the power they wield in the family and society. Again, status has been defined by Mahadeva 1989 as the importance of one's own legacy and achievements, including money, property, materials, merits, privileges, access to resources and benefits, comforts, power, and decision-making autonomy. It is a multidimensional, dynamic, and relative concept. Women seek freedom from family responsibilities to achieve intellectual and emotional satisfaction from creative or professional activities. Women claim the right to freedom as individuals, not because of or in spite of the fact that they are women. One of the best known examples of the spirit of the lack of freedom for women was provided by Virginia Woolf when in 1928 she addressed students at Durton and Newham College, Cambridge. For genius like Shakespeare's is not born among laboring, uneducated, clever people. How then could it have been born amongst women whose work began almost before they were put in the nursery, who were forced to it by their parents and held to it by all the power of law and custom? How far is this from the women in rural Bangladesh village or in Bihar, India, who visit the village midwife, touching her feet and begging for a medicine which will stop them from having more children? Yet both are an expression of the need for the liberation of women from oppression. In 1975, during the International Women's Year, there was an understanding, feeling, and awareness among women that they shared common problems and that their problems were beginning to receive recognition from women and men all over the world. During the last decade, there has been increasing concern about the position of women in society. The problems between men and women are among women from different social groups. Two major concomitant aspects were: 1. Subordination, 2. Emancipation of women, especially women in poverty groups. These two aspects are pertinent in the context of South and Southeast Asia, where societies are undergoing rapid economic, political, and cultural changes. Many countries in South Asia, including Bangladesh, specifically after the colonial period, have expressed a commitment of constructing a new society in which generation of wealth and the eradication of poverty and inequality would be given top priority. Women are central to processes of change as much as the maintenance of life. Much of this work is done without pay and through non-market exchange relationship. It remains in the realm of the informal sector. The centrality of women's role in everyday life gets intertwined in the fabric of social relations and social structures in ways that create women's subordination and unequal position when compared to men. This is evidenced by the traditional marriage and divorce system, the dowry system, systems of inheritance, unequal legal treatment, women's lack of decision-making power in public spheres, discriminatory educational and economic practices, differential access to social services such as food, new knowledge and skills, status and power, income, land, and opportunities. In situations of extreme poverty, women's unequal position is even more pronounced. It is the female child who first gets dropped out of school, and where there is food shortage, it is the women and daughters who eat last. Ruth Dixon, a pioneer author on women and development, defines women's status as the degree to which they can have access to and control over material resources, food, land, income, and other forms of wealth, and social resources, knowledge, power, and prestige. Within the family, the community, and society, Dixon, 1978, increasingly social resources is derived from one's ability to command economic resources. Women's status, however, continues to be derived from the family. While men's status is linked to their jobs, women cannot ignore this connection because the status derives strongly from motherhood, wifehood, and being feminine. Afshar, 1992. Despite women's significant status as mothers and wives, men often have higher authority than women within the household. Keeping house has been termed the most singular of occupations since, by its informality, its irrationality, and its cultural importance, the whole situation of the household stands in violent contrast to the rest of the occupations system. It is clear that the domestic work of the household, although productive in nature, cannot be explained in economic terms but must be understood in the context of powerful social norms and assign women responsibility for the domestic domain. In agricultural societies, mainly in South Asia, women's status deteriorates as land and economic surplus becomes concentrated in the hands of men. The colonial experience in Africa greatly diminishes the position of women through the privatization and ownership of land, which eliminated their rights to land and relegated them to the private sphere. Bourgeois, 1970. However, in modernizing societies, since status is equated with earning power, women hold subordinate economic status despite the fact that women perform a substantial amount of work. Status is often measured in terms of prestige of occupation. Global women at a glance. Throughout the world, women continue to face inequality in all spheres of life. Examples from survey will validate this statement. The index ranking of 151 countries on gender inequality in addressing poverty, education, basic health, employment, income, violence, and political participation, contained in various human development report prepared by the United Nations Development Programme since 1995 till 2003, shows that no country treats women as well as men. Women and poverty. Of the world's 1.3 billion people living in abject poverty, it is estimated that nearly 70% are women. Platform for Action, para 16. Women in education. Worldwide literacy rates are improving, but in all regions, illiteracy remains higher for women than for men. Of the world's nearly 1 billion illiterate adults, two-thirds are women. Approximately 100 million children, including 60 million girls, remain without access to primary education, and over two-thirds of the world's 960 million illiterate adults are women. Platform for Action, para 7. Women and health. Throughout the world, women live longer than men, but women do not outnumber men in the world as a whole. Indeed, there are only about 98 women per 100 men on the globe. Health and well-being elude the majority of women. PFA, para 89. In many parts of the world, women receive less attention in healthcare than men do, and particularly girls often receive very much less support than boys. As a result of this gender bias, the mortality rates of females often exceed those of males. With the availability of modern technologies to determine the gender of the fetus, female infanticide and sex-selective abortion of female fetuses have become common in many countries. It is particularly prevalent in East Asia, in China and South Korea, but also prevalent in Singapore and Taiwan, and is beginning to emerge as a statistically significant phenomenon in India and South Asia as well. It is in this phenomenon that have led to the claim that over 100 million women are missing, since 2001. Over 80 million women worldwide are subject to female genital surgery, resulting in lifelong health problems. Death is caused by malnutrition through food preference being given to males. Chinkin and Wright, 1993. Undernourishment may well result from greater morbidity, which can adversely affect both the absorption of nutrients and the performance of bodily functions. In South Asia, maternal undernourishment is more common than in most regions of the world. Globally, 43% of all women and 51% of pregnant women suffer from iron deficiency anemia. Approximately 585,000 women die every year, over 1,600 every day, from causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. A major barrier for women to the achievement of the highest attainable standard of health is inequality both between men and women and among women in different geographical regions. Social classes and indigenous and ethnic groups, PFA para 89, women are becoming increasingly affected by HIV today. About 52% of estimated cases are women, and the number of infected women are increasing at an alarming rate, which is expected to reach 30 million by the year 2005. Women and work. Women earn less for comparable work, are often barred from certain forms of lucrative employment, and perform much of their work in the unpaid private sector, including the rural sector. They have no choice but to accept poorly paid, undervalued work in often dangerous working conditions and with no job security. The majority of women earn, on average, about 3/4 of the pay of males for the same work outside the agriculture sector in both developed and developing countries. In most countries, women work approximately twice the unpaid time men do. Women make up 31% of the official labor force in developing countries and 46.7% of worldwide. Rural women produce more than 55% of all food grown in developing countries. Legal barriers, including those derived from customary law to the ownership of or access to land, resources, capital, and technology, restrict women's advancement. PFA para 156. Women in politics and decision making. With regards to public life, women remain underrepresented in the international and national decision and policy making bodies. Politically, in many countries, adult women have not yet achieved the right to vote. Only 24 women have ever been elected heads of state, although the 10 women heads of state who were in office at the end of 1994 were the highest in history. Women are underrepresented in national decision making bodies, including legislative and economic bodies and those agencies responsible for law and justice. Women hold 10.5% of the seats in the world's parliaments. Article 8 of UN Charter provides that no restriction shall be placed on the eligibility of both men and women to participate under conditions of equality in this principle and subsidiary organs. However, there has never been a woman Secretary General, and only after some concerted effort do women now occupy a third of professional category posts within the Secretariat. Out of 50 presidents of the General Assembly since 1945, only 2 have been women. Out of 89 executive heads of various organizations within the United Nations system, there are no women. Of the 185 highest ranking diplomats of the United Nations, only 7 are women. Recently, there have been more women heads of major UN programs than ever before. That is, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, the head of UNICEF, UNFPA, WFP, and the UNEP. These are, however, the soft programs of the international arena comparable to such areas as education, child care, and family planning, and population programs in the domestic governments. Women still do not occupy senior positions in the hard areas of international peace and security, peacekeeping and disarmament, and in programs for trade and investment or economic development. Hurrell and Woods, 1997. Women and violence. Worldwide, 20 to 50% of women experience some degree of domestic violence during marriage. The primary victims of today's armed conflicts are civilian women and their children, not soldiers. Women migrate in large numbers to seek work and too frequently become victims of violence and sexual exploitation. The instability and breakdowns of political structures and regimes in different regions of the world, coupled with economic structural adjustments programs, have reduced social expenditures and transferred social responsibilities to individuals with disproportionately adverse impact upon women, thus also increasing trafficking in women and children. According to the estimate of the UNHCR, 80% of the world's refugees and displaced persons are women and children, many fleeing armed conflict in which they were not allowed any part in decision-making. PFA para 136. As refugees, they are subject to further discrimination, violence, and insecurity. UNHCR, Geneva, 1993. Women continue to be subject to rape and sexual violence in armed conflict. Women are also subject to other forms of violence in peacetime in all societies, irrespective of religious, political ideologies, class, or culture. The UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women has identified this violence in 3 phases: the home, the community, and the state. As she has stated, violence at the personal, social, international level stems from the same roots, and that sustainable global peace cannot be achieved without eliminating normal violence against women. References: Afshar H., 1991, Women Development and Survival in the Third World, New York, Longman, INC. Beauvoir, SD, 1949, The Second Sex, New York, Modern Library, Black, M. and Coward, R. 1981, Linguistic, Social, and Sexual Relations and Screen Education, Volume 39, page 83. Bosserup, E. 1970, Women's Role in Economic Development, New York, St. Martin's Press, K. Mahadevan, ed. 1989, Women and Population Dynamics, Perspectives from Asian Countries, India, Sage Publications. Safi Leo's Rothschild C. 1982, Female Power, Autonomy, and Demographic Change in the Third World in Women's Roles and Population Trends in the Third World, Richard Anker, M. Buvenik, and N.H. Youssef, eds. London and Sydney, Crom and Helm. Young, K. 1988, Gender and Development, a Rational Approach, Oxford, Oxford University Press. Wolf, V. 1945, quoted in Westview Special Studies on Women in Contemporary Asia, Boulder, Colorado, Westview Press, 1982, Chapter 2, complete.